Good evening, everyone, and good evening to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm delighted to welcome back, because this is our second event with Peng Shepherd, whose original book, first novel, The Book of M, what was it, 2 years ago or 3? How long has it been?
Longer than that, 2018.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's been a while.
That's the trouble with the pandemic. Time
yeah, it's
blurs,
been like a
right?
couple of apocalypses
right.
since then.
So we had the pleasure of talking to her then, and here we are now with The Cartographers, a marvelous book, and rings with me on so many levels, because I'm actually spent much of my life either in the New York Public Library or related libraries. I was a librarian at the Library of Congress back in the day before I became a bookseller. And actually, not only did I work in maps, but I once had the great pleasure, because this is how they train you, of being set loose in rare books with a collection of Lewis and Clark maps that nobody had cataloged. And it was really an awesome experience to, you know, look through them and decide how to categorize them and be amazed that they had lasted so long. And eventually my husband and I took a cruise on the Columbia River so that we could do part of the Lewis and Clark expedition. And if you drive, as we have up through Utah and Wyoming and so forth, you run into parts of the Lewis and Clark Trail. So maps really help us make sense of the world, and that'll be part of what Peng's going to talk about what is the role of maps in her book, and what's the role of the New York Public Library. So, not that I've said all that. Which question would you like to deal with first?
The first one. Can I hold this, by the way? Because I feel like I'm going to do something, and I'm going to do this with the cord.
I don't care what you do.
No, I just mean it doesn't make noise. It doesn't make noise if I hold it.
No,
okay.
It's fine. I leave mine on the table because I'll drop it for sure.
I'm so sure that I'm going to do something like this. It's going to go flying.
We're getting some handheld mics. This is a fancy new system that we have, but it's better for men with collars and pockets than it is for women. So we're going to get some handheld mics as well. Learn as we go. All right. So we're going to talk about the library. Or
the
maps?
library?
Was it maps? I've lost track of what I said. Does anyone remember what I said was the first question? Maps? Was it maps?
Maps was the first one.
Thank you very much. All right, maps.
Yeah. Well, they are. I don't know. I think I grew up loving them for the same reason that I love books, and it's because they feel like, in addition to being, you know, diagrams that tell you where to go, they also feel like stories, because they are made by people, and the person that's making them has a bias or has an agenda or has a motivation or just has an interest. And so you always have to know who's making the map, and then you can figure out what they're trying to tell you. And so it's not only a map, it's a story and it's a mystery all wrapped in one. And so I just think they are fascinating, and I'm so glad that I got to write about them.
Here be dragons. And if you've looked at really wonderful medieval maps, because in the parts of the unknown world, because they didn't know where in fact everything was, they would write in the margins, here be dragons.
And draw a little dragon in, yeah, for danger.
And some of them would have like wind, you know, clouds, and I mean, they diagram weather in part too, but you know, without modern surveying equipment, it was kind of a guess much of the time about what they were drawing. Longitude, any of you read Longitude, which is an absolutely brilliant book?
Oh, I had that recommended to me at the Tucson Book Festival. Yeah.
Right. So do you all know what longitude is? It's with latitude.
Like the concept.
Longitude, right? But longitude is a mathematical concept. And there was a contest in the 18th century because with the British Empire and its navy circumnavigating the globe and so forth, it became even more important for them to be able to figure out where they were rather than just sailing along the coast or trying to figure it out. And eventually, a guy figured it out. If you go to the Royal Greenwich Observatory, where I have spent many happy hours, that machine is there that was developed. And anyway, once we got longitude and we had latitude, it was possible to make more accurate maps.
Yeah. I think, doesn't the story go that the king at the time, because they'd figured out how to make latitude, but longitude was very difficult to figure out with the math and the tools that they had at the time. And so the king offered a reward, right, to anybody that could figure out how to calculate longitude. And so all of the scientists all over the world had been working and couldn't do it. And it was just some merchant, right? It was this shopkeeper
I mean,
something like that.
It was a lot of money on the table.
But it was just this
first.
This little shopkeeper, I think, that finally figured out how you could calculate it.
I can't remember for sure who he was. You have to remember that astrolabes and so forth, if you spend any time in ship museums, there's some really great ones around the world, like Barcelona and so forth. You can go down, big ports, and they will show you all the instruments that people used to use when sailing, which was the principal way people traveled. I mean, it was at least certainly to cross continents. It was the only way people, go from one continent to another. The only way they traveled. We're very imprecise. Weather could get in the way, the whole bit. But you're right. If you go way back to ancient maps, it's so much fun to see how they guessed, how the world looked. Yeah. And surprisingly, they could be accurate.
Yeah, it is incredible. I cannot imagine just trying to look off the side of a ship or figure out how did you draw whole continents like that? I don't even know.
So, if maps are stories, how far can we go in describing the role of maps in this book without blowing the plot?
Yeah, no. So I actually love talking about mine is still this is my safety bag. I'll take it out. Well, because of the jacket is so delicate.
It's a great jacket, by the way. Too.
It is.
I really love it. It has a three-dimensional look. I think they did an excellent job, the cover designer, to make it work.
Yeah, we went through. I don't know, 5 or 6 complete redesign, because you would think, it's a book about maps, just put a map on the cover, right, and be done. But it turned out that none of them, they'd all look like a textbook or something. And so when we finally ended up deciding to put the New York Public Library on the cover, these are like the mysterious bookshelves from the library. But I just love it. But so we can talk about the real life story behind. So one of my favorite things to say, and it's like a little bit of a spoiler, but not too much of a spoiler. This is a fiction book, obviously, but it was actually inspired by a real life cartography mystery that I heard maybe 10 years ago, I think. And it is the strangest, coolest, most unbelievable thing I've ever heard. And so couldn't stop thinking about it. And then about 7 years ago, I started trying to write this book, and now here we are. But the story goes that in the early 1900s, like 1900 to 1930, cartography at that time, it was grueling, painstaking work, because they had to survey the land, manually, and they had to draw everything by hand. They didn't have GPS, they didn't have satellites. And so making even a single map was so much harder than it is now. And so all cartographers back then were very desperate for a way to protect their work from, because once you draw a map, it is pretty easy for someone to just copy it at that point. And so, but because maps are different than art, where if you have a picture of the Mona Lisa, nobody can really copy it, because if you copied it, it's obviously fake. There's only one Mona Lisa. But a map, there's no way to really prove that somebody has copied your work, right? So there were these 2 map makers in Manhattan, named Otto G. Lindbergh and Ernest Alpers, and they had cornered the market on foldable gas station driving maps early, because they had realized before any of the other bigger companies that this was going to be the new kind of map, because the automobile had been invented. People could suddenly drive further and faster than they ever could before, and so this was the new kind of map that was needed. They had started making them. The bigger companies like Rand McNally and H.M. Goucher had decided that they wanted a piece of the profits too, and they were racing to catch up. And Otto and Ernest were convinced that these bigger companies were copying their maps that they had produced first in order to, speed up. And so what they decided to do when they were out driving around in rural upstate New York one time, getting ready to make their next map, they decided that what they would do to protect themselves, or to be able to prove that somebody was stealing their work, was they would invent, they were going to put a phantom settlement on their map. And a phantom settlement, it's an obscure cartography term, and it means an error on a map, but an intentional error. And so you would put this kind of thing, which could be a small mountain that wasn't, that's not really there, where the land is flat, or a river, a bend in a river that's not really there. You would put something like that on your map on purpose, because then if it turns up on someone else's map, because it's an error, you can prove that they've copied you. Because if they had done their own work, it shouldn't be there. So Otto and Ernest, they were out there in rural upstate New York in the middle of nowhere, and they decided, this is where we're going to put our phantom settlement. So they made up and they hid a tiny town in the middle of nowhere in upstate rural New York, and they named it using a combination of their initials, kind of like a secret signature. And then about a year later, Rand McNally released its version of the same area, and these two map makers spotted that tiny town on Rand McNally's map in the same area. And so they sued them, and they claimed copyright infringement because they argued that the only way that their town could appear on Rand McNally's map is if Rand McNally had copied their work instead of doing their own land survey. Because if they had gone out there and done their own land survey, they would have seen that there was nothing there because the town didn't exist. And Rand McNally said, but the town does exist. So Otto and Ernest, they had no idea what that meant. They had no idea what to make of it. They got their lawyer, they got in their car, and they drove out to the middle of nowhere in rural upstate New York to basically take pictures of the empty land and claim their victory in court. But when they got there, instead of nothing, there was a gas station, a general store, a fishing lodge, houses with people living in them, and an official record for the town in the county administration logs with the same name that these men had given it from their own initials. So this town that shouldn't have existed at all, it's totally imaginary town, somehow did exist.
I think we can spell a rap called Rand McNally. You know, I have to push this chair back or I'm going to get a stiff neck looking at you. Excuse me. I think that's amazing. They must have had a mole of some kind who figured out.
I know.
You know?
So yeah. Well, I'm not. So that's the beginning of the story. That's the you know, I guess the real life story. That's the inspiration for this book. And I won't tell you what happens next. But if you read the whole book in the author's note at the end, I'll tell you how all of that actually happened in real life. But that's what the inspiration for this story is based on.
Proving that, in fact, maps really do tell stories, right?
Yeah.
Or create things. It's incredible how valuable maps are. I know some of the great library heists, in fact, have been maps where people, there's one particular one, I don't remember where the library is. I'm sort of dimly thinking it was in Pennsylvania, but I could be wrong. But anyway, somebody went in and sliced valuable maps out of collections or atlases and so forth. And you know, you can frame an individual plate from a book and turn it into a work of art or something of the sort. And this library had a tremendous loss. So copyright, it's interesting. I don't think people often realize that maps can be copyrighted.
Yeah, and it's just so hard to prove, though, because even if you do copyright your own map, because the point of it is that you don't add artistic interpretation, largely. You know, the point of it is to be accurate and not artistic. So it is so hard for that reason, unlike with art, to prove that somebody is copying you instead of just also doing the same accurate survey.
So now, how many of you go to MapQuest when you want to go somewhere? Or your GPS will tell you. If you watch particularly British crime shows where they work on the theory that there's CCTV everywhere and every single person has a cell phone and criminals are too stupid to ever leave their phones at home when they're out being criminals. There's always a whole map thing that shows up, you know, where you can see the police are following, you know, the car and so forth. So we're a long way from, you know, the ancient Persian or the Greek map maker or the medieval map maker for that. For that. One of the other things that's really interesting is orientation too. There's a book somewhere, I think we have it in the store, about maps, and it's really disconcerting because some of them, they flip it so that what we're used to looking at north and south, right? But they flip it, and so the south is on top and the north is on the bottom, and it's completely unnerving. When you can't locate yourself on that map. I mean, really, you know, so we get used to a particular perspective. You know, there's conventions about how maps are presented, at least in the northern hemisphere. And it'll be really interesting to see as people are migrating and so forth, whether maps will in fact, will change. So talk about your characters, because people in maps can be obsessed.
They can, yeah. Can I see who has read the book yet? You're so good. Okay. Yes, and Beth's read the book. Okay, so should I give like a very brief overview
absolutely.
of what? Okay, because most people haven't. So it's the Cartographers. It's a mystery. It's a novel about map making, obviously, and family secrets. And so it follows a young woman named Nell. She's a young cartography scholar, and 7 years before the novel starts, she's a character who her whole life and her greatest passion is cartography, and it's also the only way that she can relate to her father and the only way that she can remember her mother, because her mother died when she was very young. She was a very famous cartographer. She passes away when Nell's about 2. And because of that, her relationship with her father, who is also a very famous cartographer who works at the New York Public Library, their relationship has always been really strained and kind of distant. And so she's grown up thinking her whole life that if she can only be as good of a cartographer as her mother, that might be the way kind of into a relationship with her father, and a way that she can earn his respect and get him to finally open up to her, and they can have the kind of father-daughter relationship that she's always wanted. But 7 years before the novel starts, she finds a map that seems pretty minor and pretty insignificant. It's not very historical, and it's not worth very much. But for some reason that she doesn't really understand, her father gets in an argument with her about it, and the fight ends up becoming so bad that he fires her from the New York Public Library, and he essentially ruins her professional reputation. It's this big academic scandal over this map. And so they haven't spoken for 7 years. And at the start of the book, she's called back to the New York Public Library because he has passed away at his desk. And so while she is there talking to police and kind of, filling out whatever you need to fill out, the paperwork, she finds that same seemingly insignificant map hidden away in his things. And she has no idea in the first place why it caused such a fight and why he ruined her life over it, but also then why, if it was so unimportant, does he still have it 7 years later? And so she ends up taking this map, which you probably shouldn't do. You probably shouldn't take a map from a library, from the desk of a person who's just died. But she sort of steals it, and then she sets out to figure out why this map is so important, what secrets it's hiding, what secrets has her father been hiding for, decades.
So this is a fairly closed world. There's not, an enormous population of map makers. It's certainly at this level, anyway. And so it would be a terrible thing if you aspire to be among the best in your profession and you were kicked out of the one place where the best people work, so to speak. That'd be really hard. So it's not like she lost a job at Macy's or something.
Yeah.
And you can't really, academics being what they are.
There's
there are a number of mysteries, actually quite a lot, powered by what we call dark academia, or
such a good genre. It is.
Yeah. That loss of reputation or a desire for recognition as a scholar or preeminent in your field or something is much more important than money, although money helps.
Yeah.
But it isn't necessarily the major driver. Tony Hillerman's Edgar-winning book, The Thief of Time, was in fact about archaeology, and in the end turns upon academic preferment and so forth. And when I taught at ASU, I taught crime fiction there in the English department for a few years, and I always assigned them 7 books. And invariably, every year, the students completely rejected the thesis and the motive of Thief of Time. They couldn't believe that anybody would actually kill just to get a better job at the university. It just didn't work for them. And it was really, kind of a wake-up call for me to recognize that.
So it sounds totally logical to me. I do it.
Just saying, that you have to be wound up in that kind of a community to understand what it would be like to be booted out of it, or not to be able to be employed in it at anything but maybe a very low level. So what's she done for those 7 years to occupy herself?
So she works at the only job she can get, because every time she tries to go in for an interview at a university or a museum or anything like that, they realize, because she's got the same last name as her father, that she's that Nell Young, who's, you know, and nobody wants to anger, you know, the infamous Dr. Daniel Young. And so nobody will touch her because they're afraid of, you know, him bringing the wrath of the New York Public Library down on them. So she, for 7 years, has worked at a little, it's like a print shop that makes knockoff fake antique maps that you might, you know, like someone might hang up on their living room wall and sort of look cultured or whatever, but it's not really accurate at all. It's like extra weathered to look extra mysterious, or so that's the best job she can get until she ends up stumbling back onto this map.
I love that. There's so many ways to do that. You can soak it in tea. You know, I mean, we know something about book fraud. It's not that we indulge in it, but there are actually a lot of what we call biblio-mysteries, crime fiction, where books are at stake. John Dunning wrote probably the very best one called Book to Die years and years ago, which sent everyone racing home to their bookshelves to see if the books that they had casually bought over the years were actually autographed and first
that
printings.
first edition
the
wasn't
whole
really.
No, it's not a first edition. It's even trickier than that. It has to be the first printing of a first edition.
Right.
Right. You know why?
Yeah. Why? Because is it because it's the one or the?
No, the reason I love
the first
I
printing
never
of
get
a first.
to tell people this anymore because nobody really cares. But the truth is that it goes all the way back to Gutenberg and movable metal type, which is the genius of Gutenberg, was that he cast letters in movable, you know, it's about this long. It has the face of the letter and then it has a little tail on it, and you can put it in a tray and pack it all together, and then you can reuse the type. You didn't have to carve it out of a wood block, which is how they did it before, or, you know, so you could never change it. But the way they made it work was they borrowed the wine press. And so they would put the movable metal type in a tray, and they would ink it, and they would put the piece of paper down, and then what did they do? They applied pressure, right? The wine press went, and the impression was made. But every time it happened, the type degraded. It either broke or it began to wear down. So the only really valuable piece was the first printing, and every subsequent printing was like less valuable because it didn't hold up. Right, and today, of course, it's completely irrelevant because everything is done electronically and it doesn't matter. So today, a first printing means either you were smart enough to admire the book, especially a first author's book, like, for example, the Book of M. You were smart enough to buy into M. I'll get it. or you paid a fortune later to buy a first print, an autographed first print. And we've done this for 32 years, and to a great degree, we've acquired a whole community of people who collect books, and that's the hallmark of a great book, right, Lee? Yeah, you've been doing that for a long time, right? So there we are. Anyway, with maps, I don't know exactly how that works, but maps are printed, but it wouldn't be like Gutenberg.
Well, I mean,
they were
some
cut.
of the
I think
ancient
almost
maps,
there must have been like either wood blocks or they were stamped. You know, you can go one way or another. Either you gouge into something and fill it up with ink and print it, or you raise it up by chiseling away everything around it, and then you print it.
Yeah. I'm not sure. I mean, if you go back even further than that, they were all hand drawn, which is
but to duplicate it, then you would just have to keep painting it every time, and then error would be introduced if every time you duplicated it, you had to draw it from scratch. Yeah, there's no way that two of them
I think they had. So I think the master cartographer, he would draw the first one, and then he would have his apprentices, and they would copy the other one. So you know, the one that the cartographer drew, usually for the king or something. But you know, the king is going to get that one. Right. And then the merchant class can buy the maps by the apprentices.
So there are probably 11 people at the New York Public Library who actually care about any of this, right? But her father is one of them, and she is one of them. Now, you know, if this is in theory, a crime novel of some sort, the first thing you have to be suspicious of is, why did he die? I'm not telling. But why did he die at his desk? It may be a red herring. It may have absolutely no relevance to anything except he needed to die in order to kick off this whole story so she could find the map at his desk. Or you can be deeply suspicious of his death. So that's one of the things you can read the book about. So who's Felix? You know, you've talked about Felix, but who is he?
Yeah. So Felix is the love interest. He's so he is previously Nell and Felix were together when they were both working at the New York Public Library. She was the one that also got him a job, and they were working together under her father. And during that horrible fight, Felix, like a good boyfriend, jumps into the argument to try to defend her against her father, and her father ends up firing them both, actually. And so they break up because of that, and Nell spends 7 years missing him, but too afraid to reach out to him because she feels like she's ruined his life too. Which it turns out she has not ruined his life. I mean, he misses his job and he loved working at the library, but in the meantime, he ends up getting a job at this tech giant that's sort of like Google Maps, but even bigger than that. And so when he meets up back with her eventually, because she decides that in order to solve this mystery, she needs to go back and find her old partner because he might know things too about this map that they both, their lives were ruined over. And so he comes from he's got a very different perspective on things because he now works with electronic maps and like maps of the future, and he has all of this data at his fingertips, but it's a very different way of looking at a map than looking at a paper map. And so that was very fun to compare and contrast the different way that they both see maps now.
There's also a serious dearth of eligible men in New York City. And so, it would be hard to let one go.
Yeah, but if you were that guilty over it, I mean, she really thought she'd ruined his life.
True.
So, yeah.
So if you're going to have a book that you're going to pursue for, how many pages do we have here?
400?
300. Oh, that's the acknowledgments. 387. It has to be a stake worth pursuing. In other words, there's no point in writing a thriller if you don't have a high stakes involved in it. Otherwise, why are these people chasing after everything? And why are you spending your time reading it? Why is she spending her time writing it? So you really did need to make this map valuable. You needed to make this community at the library. You needed to make the job and the position really important.
Yeah, I think so. What I started with was just this map, and it has this cool story behind it. It's got a secret and mystery wrapped up in it. But when I was writing, I needed it to feel more than just academic, because it can't just be that Nell discovers some kind of a copyright quirk or some sort of
it's not a
like
high
research.
Yeah,
and so it's always about the people. It always comes back to the characters. What do they care about? What's important to them? What would it cost to lose that? And so the reason in this book that the map is so important, let's see how I can talk about it without spoiling it. The reason the map is important in this book is because it has a secret on it. But the real reason that the secret and the map are so important is because they are sort of standing in for a person. And there's a character in the book who cares a lot about a specific person, but for one reason or another cannot have them. And so sometimes when you want something or someone so badly and you can't have them, the next best thing becomes an object that reminds you of them. And so sometimes possessing the object is almost as good, or it is as good as you're going to get to possessing the person. And so that is part of the reason that the map triggers such obsession in a couple of the characters, and the reason that so many people are desperate to control it, because it's more about the emotion underneath and the people that are involved in the map, and not so much the map itself.
Well, obsession is actually more powerful often than greed when it comes to driving people to do both good and bad things, really.
Yeah.
So,
because one's just kind of like a mathematical calculation, and the other one is coming from inside, and that's really hard to talk yourself. It's hard to talk your heart out of something.
So how do you form your characters? Did they gradually become? Do you gradually get to know them? I mean, obviously you created them all, so it's not as though you just went into a cocktail party and grabbed up a few. But how's that process work for you?
They so sometimes they come. Some of them show up fully formed, like Swan, who's the director of the New York Public Library, and he's kind of like Nell's second father, I guess. He came fully formed, but there are characters like Nell and Nell's father and some of the other people that you meet later in the book where, like I think in the first draft, I started and Nell and her father were friends, and they were the two that were going to go and figure out this mystery. And that's how I thought it was going to go, and I tried to write it that way, and they kept fighting me on it. They kept wanting to have an argument, and they kept like breaking up with each other and splitting. I was like, this is not. I need you to work with me, but they would not work with me. And it wasn't until I realized that the fight is the point. The point is that they are separated, and the map is what may or may not bring them back together and reveal things. It's not the thing that they start with. So I don't know, it's very, sometimes I feel like I am discovering the mystery as I write it the same way that the readers are discovering the mystery as they read it once I'm done. It really feels like that.
We'll pause here for the siren as it goes whipping past. Goldwater has a surprising number of accidents. We're not entirely immune from them. All right, did you have a question? Or were you just...
No, I was just saying something with
Okay. It's fascinating the different ways that writers come to their stories. What works for Peng isn't going to work for somebody else.
Yeah.
And it's easy to sit out here and think that the plot is the thing that would first come to you. That you'd get a great idea for a plot, and then you'd make everything else fit. But I think more and more, as I've done this now for however many, 32 years, talking to authors, I think it's really the characters. If you can't come up with at least your central character, your point of view character, the one where the emotion and all the rest of it is going to drive the story, that you can't really write the story.
Yeah, you definitely, I mean, I think I try to come up with a plot first, and I think by now I should have just figured it out that I just need to come up with a character first, because I come up with a premise or a plot, and then I'm so frustrated and I can't get it going until I finally realize the main character and everything that they...
I think, you need what we call the instigating incident. I love that phrase. Sometimes I trip over it, but the instigating incident, what is it that is going to kick off the story? And I think once you figure out what that is, then you have to have the characters to make the whole thing work. So I don't know that you could just sit down and say, I want to write about this woman that works at the New York Public Library. I mean, that's not going anywhere. Yeah. But once you come up with the idea, then you begin to populate it.
Yeah.
Do you have fun
you have
with
to
that?
figure out. I do. Yeah, I really do. But it's always interesting trying to invent a person, because they never end up the way that you were expecting, even if you went into it with very clear ideas of how you thought they were going to be or what you thought they were going to want. They always surprise you. So it's fun, but a little bit scary.
So how do you do dialogue? Are you a person who sits around in coffee shops and listens to other people?
No.
An ear for dialogue is a really essential thing for an author. It needs to sound like real people having real conversations.
Yeah. I think I write it and then I say it out loud to myself, and I probably seem crazy.
No, actually, that's the best way to do it.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, but if anybody walks in on you, they're like having both sides of the conversation coming out of my mouth.
I talked to somebody recently who hires somebody to read her books back to her as she's writing them, so she can hear how it sounds.
She lets them see like a draft. That's scary.
Not even a draft. I think it's even more evolutionary than that. But I mean, it's so important. The rhythm of the words and the way they fit together. I've edited, because we sold Poison Pen Press a couple of years ago, but I probably edited nearly 900 books. And a huge part of that is taking out the words that are repetitious, or Elmer Leonard famously said, he leaves out the words that readers skip. But how do you know which ones those are? Mostly adverbs, according to him. But in the process of writing a long draft, the author is doing it over a great period of time, whereas I, the editor, or you, the reader, is reading it in a fairly short period of time. And so all that repetitious material really shows up, but it doesn't, when you're working on it, making the draft, you keep coming back, and then you have to kind of get back in the story. And so there is a real tendency to repeat yourself.
Oh yeah, my thing is M dashes. I finished I love M dashes. When I finished the first draft and I was getting ready to maybe send it to my editor, I just went through and I did a Control F just to count how many, There were 2,500 M dashes
Probably
in
too
my
many.
first draft. Yeah, way too many.
I love that. I like ellipses. I mean, M dashes and ellipses actually have very different. I mean, it's a technical sort of a thing, but an M dash is actually like a fast break so that you can move the action quickly.
Oh, it's
and an ellipsis is when somebody has a thought and it's kind of dying away, or there's a pause or something. If you use them well.
And sparingly,
you can do a
crucially.
lot. Well, sparingly helps, yeah, but it can do a lot, and yet they're relatively recent. If you go back and read, early novels and so forth, you never see an ellipsis or an M dash. I mean, Robinson Crusoe, come on, not there. But I think it's, and I'm not sure that social media and texting hasn't really increased it.
I don't know. I use M dashes in my text messages.
And exclamation points. That's another another deadly trap. Right?
Yes.
So good for you that you actually go through and catch them yourself. And
I couldn't do 2,500 is way too many to ask anyone else to deal with. So yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So have you ever done any reporting? I know your mom is very good at that. But have you any personal experience with that?
Not too much. No, I was always on the imaginary side of it.
Because I mean, there are a lot of authors who come to us from journalism, or the law, or so forth. But in journalism, in particular, their ear is so well tuned to how people talk, to dialogue, that they tend to write excellent dialogue, and it really moves. Because
they're just so used to hearing it. My mom is one of my first readers.
Scary, huh?
No, actually, I don't know.
Are you a
just
nice
because
mom?
I mean, she's been reading my stuff since I was 5, So, I don't know. And she reads. She's a book a day kind of person, and so it's just, I don't know. She feels like the perfect person to give a first draft to. Just say like, is it? What is it?
Does she give you notes?
She does. Yeah.
But you're really lucky.
Yeah. No, I know I am. Yeah. She's a great reader.
So you're having fun with this, which is a really important thing.
Yes, I am. Yeah.
And you're off to work on yet another novel?
I am halfway through the first draft of the third one.
Well, that's really exciting.
Yeah.
I mean, from 2018 to 2022.
Yeah, there was
so we need you to speed it up.
I know. Yeah, the book. Well, this one. So the book's about 400 pages, and the reason that it came out this year, it was supposed to come out this time last year, so it was delayed a whole year because, like, 2 weeks before it was due, I changed the whole twist and I had to rewrite half the book in. So, yeah. But I think it's so much better for it. We had a call, my editors and I, and at first they were like, "Oh, I don't really. I mean, it's like 2 weeks." And then we talked about it, and I told them the new idea. Like I was like, "I fixed it. This is a new idea," and they said, "Okay, yeah, we'll move the book." So
that was very understanding.
Yeah. They're wonderful editors.
So do you see, that you are going to fall into any kind of a pattern with books? I mean, you've written two books that have multiple elements in them. Do you just want to write fiction and not too much worry about what it's going to be called?
I mean, I feel like it's not up to me what it's called anyway, and it's always sort of fun to go into a bookstore because every bookstore has the books in a different genre, so I have to kind of go hunt around and see the way that they...
Except here, we don't do that.
Yeah, which is fun. But I would say I definitely like genre. I like playing with it. I like bending it. I like crossing multiple ones. And so I think if the Book of M is post-apocalyptic or fantasy, if this one is mystery, I would say the third one's kind of a sci-fi thriller. And yeah, I'm just having fun with it.
So you do like something a little...
It's got to be weird. It has to be weird.
Weird.
As long as it's weird, it's good.
I was looking for a more tactful word.
Yeah, no.
I'm fine
I
with
love weird. Weird's a good word.
Yeah, but I mean, that makes it fun, to read something where you run into the unexpected. How many of you read the Book of M? And look at that.
Oh,
That's
wow.
pretty impressive.
Awesome.
Wow.
Yeah.
So they followed you
Well,
to
thank
this
you.
one. Yeah, very good. So
Yeah.
how about questions? Who would like to ask Peng questions? Christina, I have to tell you, Christina is about to become a published author in 2023.
Congrats.
She has won the Tony Hillerman Prize for Best Mystery that St. Martin's Press runs, and we're very excited for her.
Thank you very much, Barbara. That's very kind of you to say. I actually have 3 questions, but I won't ask them.
Here we go.
So how many end dashes did you end up turning in?
There's like 950 or something.
That's a big cut. So
Yes.
Congratulations.
Yeah, it took like a week.
You mentioned the author's note. I always read acknowledgments and author's notes first. Should I absolutely not do it?
Well, it'll spoil it for you.
Okay,
So
thank
yeah.
you. So I appreciate that. And then
Yeah.
the last thing is probably a longer answer.
Uh-huh.
But, not want to be Debbie Downer, but I swear I read somewhere that you at one point thought you were like done, like I can't finish this book.
Oh
Is
yes,
that right?
yeah,
What happened?
yeah. So, and you've probably heard this too, because now that your first book is about to come out, you'll get all the authors who are on their third or fourth. They'll come to you and they'll be like, "The second book is the hardest book," and
Which is actually true.
It is true. Yeah, it's true. And so you hear it the first time and you're like, "Oh, really?" And then you hear it the second time and the third time. By like the 100th time that someone has told you the second book is the hardest book, you're like, "Yeah, I know. The second book is the hardest book." Guess what? The second book is the hardest book. It's so true. It's so strange that even when you're prepared for it, it is still the hardest thing. And I spent I don't know how many drafts. I think I have the same number of pages that made it into the book I have that have been thrown away. So I've essentially rewritten the book like at least once, all the way through, just from the ground up, scratch. And I did think at one point I was so, I mean, you know that phase in the draft where you're like, that's it, I'm going to call my editor, I'm going to give back the advance, we're going to cancel the contract, I'm going to write something else. So yeah, it was a really tough book. I think mysteries are also really hard to write. Now, having written one, I have so much respect for crime and mystery writers.
Well, they have more structure.
They do, but it's also, I mean, it's hard enough for me as a reader to figure out the mysteries I'm reading it. So it was extra hard to make up the mystery.
I got it.
So, yeah. So it was definitely the hardest thing I've written to date, but I made it through.
There's a reason why the second, I mean, there are a couple of reasons.
Yeah.
When you're writing your first book, you and maybe 3 people you know, like your mom, know that you're writing a book. So there's no pressure on you.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no time constraint on you, because until you can't sell a first novel. You can sell nonfiction this way, but you can't sell a first novel until you've completely written it and submitted it. If you have done that successfully, you can sell a second novel on a synopsis, but the publisher wants to know that you can actually finish a book. And so you have to do that. And so there's no real pressure on you other than what you put on yourself. Yeah. And, you know, like Grace, whose Portrait of a Thief I just love. This is her third book, but it's the first one published, and the other 2, I always love it when authors say, you know, it's in a drawer, nobody's ever going to see it. And I always want to say, if you really don't want anybody to ever see it, burn it. Otherwise, they're going to find it at some point, and, you know, your juvenilia will come out. But the second book, you've got all that weight of expectation. Now people know that you are writing a book. Now your publisher has a contract with a timeline. Now you have fans who want to know when the book is going to come. You've been outed.
Yeah.
And so that can be a really, this also happens to people who win major literary prizes or some kind of recognition, is sometimes that has proved. Look at To Kill a Mockingbird. She was never able to write another book because the weight of that book was so extraordinary. She probably felt that she could never equal it. And if that happens to you, why would you want to do that? Only to
it's
be
very scary. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, it would be so daunting.
Yeah.
So it's even harder to write a second book if your first book has been successful, because then the weight of expectation is even greater. So I always feel, you know, if you can pull your way through your second book, then it becomes easier. And I will also tell you that you're unusual, because the sales curve usually goes like this with the first book, and then it goes like this with the second book, and then it takes a little dip, and it's your fourth book that comes back up again and begins to sell as well or better than your first book. So it's unusual, and a real testament to you that your second book has sold so well that we don't have any. Seriously, it really is.
I'm very grateful. It's been,
How about another question? Yes, ma'am.
Speaking of sales, then I actually heard about your book because I had Book of the Month.
Oh,
It was the pick last month.
Yeah.
And like I love math, so I was like very intrigued about picking it. And it was like definitely a fan favorite. I know a lot of people who picked that your book. So how has like book of the month like helped you for like this book? And I just don't know how that like obviously it's like the publisher and the book.
It is, yeah. I'm not sure exactly how Book of the Month chooses the. I don't know if they're pitched or if Book of the Month just selects the books, but it's been really wonderful. I think Book of the Month is a huge part of the reason that so many people heard about the book in the first place, and then, you know, I don't know, like they liked the cover, they like maps too, and they got interested in it. But I think it was definitely, if not the biggest reason, but definitely one of the biggest reasons that it got the traction that it did, I think. So I'm very grateful to Book of the Month for that. Yeah.
Yeah, so Goldsboro Books picked it for their
in the UK, yeah.
In the UK, so 2,000 unit sales to start with in the UK.
Yeah.
It's a very fancy edition too. They've done it with painting on the end paper. There's a lot of ways that you can make books extra beautiful, and they do a very nice job.
Yeah, they did.
Anyway, yeah.
I saw that there's something about a map inside the book.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. So let's see if I can find it as I tell you the story. So this book is based on that real life cartography mystery, and the map in that real life cartography mystery, it's that gas station folding highway map. So that's the seemingly worthless map that Nell also finds in the book. And at the time that I heard the story, like 10 years ago, I just thought it was, it's just such a fascinating story that I went home and I researched it a little bit. And then I realized that if you looked on eBay or, I don't know, like cartographyforsale.com or just Etsy, whatever, you could find copies of this gas station highway map that had that same Phantom Settlement on it. There were, like a few left because they're pretty old. And so 10 years ago, I bought one for like $5 just because I thought it would be really neat to own a little piece of this mystery that I had spent so many hours researching. And then fast forward 10 years later, and I finished the book, and my editor is like, well, we have to have, a picture of the map in the book because it's about this map. It would be so cool. And I said, yes, please, let's put maps in the book. And so she said, okay, where's this gas station highway map? Where can I find it? Where can I buy it? But you can't buy it anymore, obviously, because it's from like 1930. And so the publisher started trawling eBay and Etsy and all these places. And I guess it turns out that in the 10 years I had been writing this book, those maps became more and more rare to the point that my publisher could not find one. And so eventually what we ended up doing was digging my own copy out, and I took it to a specialty print shop and we had it scanned. So when you reach the map that this book is about, like when you reach the picture of the map in the book, it's actually a copy of the map that I bought 10 years ago. Yeah. Yeah, so that was very special to be able to, because after loving the story for so long and then writing this book, being able to put my copy of the map into the book was really neat.
Have you visited the NYPL map department?
I have.
Given you a grand tour?
I was too shy to tell them that I was writing a book. Also, I just didn't know if they would be like, we need to see a copy of your book before we can let you. Yeah. So I just sort of snuck in and wandered around the reading tables and looked at things. But I was very glad. I went right before copy edits were due just to make sure that that it was the way that I remembered and I had described it accurately, and that it was in the book. It gives you the feeling that you feel in real life when you were there. So
yeah. Well, if you're writing about a real institution, a real place, you do.
You want
if your work is fiction, you do need to get that part right, or people will write you rude letters, rude emails actually, and tell you the person.
Oh, I did get one upset email today. Actually, there's a part in the book where some characters arrive in Wisconsin in September, and I had said that it was already cold. Apparently, it's not very cold yet, and she was very mad about that. So I'm sorry.
So
yeah. I had them wearing, it was snowing. That was probably a little too much. I said it was snowing in September. It's probably not snowing.
Climate change.
Yeah, okay. Well, it was that year then. That's
That's right. Yeah, true. So I have a question for all of you. Most of us now depend on GPS, and I think it's wonderful in an urban environment. My husband and I, we've traveled all around the world, and he likes to drive, so, we've done that. And it's not that easy when you're driving into Kyushu or somewhere in Japan and your map's in kanji and, your GPS is in kanji. Don't ask how that works. I'll tell you how you do that. You take a big chunk of yen and you get out of your car in front of the nearest taxi stand, and you give them the kanji direction and you hand them the money and then you follow them. Because that's the only way you can actually navigate in a foreign language. We've had that happen. But the phone is a small map, right? And it keeps moving. But I have found over the years that when we're traveling any distance and all, that I still need a paper map because I can't see the whole topography. The range of the GPS is too small. So do any of you remember like the book ticks that AAA and I still go to AAA and and get them, because you can have a much better view of like Utah, if you want to go to the various national parks and stuff in Utah. You can't really see it on your phone. So I think that maps are still actual printed maps still matter.
No, I do too.
Or
And
maybe my generation will all die out and everybody will be more adept at it. But I do think that for an overview or for magic, that in topography to a great degree,
I think so
that
too.
maps are super exciting.
Yeah.
So
Question. You mentioned that you bought this over 10 years ago.
Uh-huh.
How long ago did you actually think was the idea for the book to come up with? I mean, it sounds like you did another book in the meantime. Did you have it on the back burner?
I did, yeah. I was writing the Book of M at the time that I bought that map. So I heard that story while I was writing the Book of M. So I think I started trying to write this book like 7 years ago, but it was very different. It was about like a shady government entity at one point, and then it was about spies, and then it was all over the place. So it took this one, the version that it is now, I think took like 3 years. So it was 4 years of trying, like trying to find my way through it. So yeah, it's been a long road with this book, but yeah.
Are you looking at me? Okay. So I have two questions. One is kind of to what you were speaking about. When you finish your first draft, what do you do for like story edit to make sure that it is working? What's your process?
Well, the first thing I do is I put it away for a month because I have to forget it a little bit, and then I try to do one thing at a time because I can't. I have some writer friends that just go through once very slowly, and then when they reach the end, that's the end of one pass, and they try to tackle every aspect at once, which I just think that's mind-boggling to me. So I do a bunch of passes. So I'll do a character pass to see, I don't know, like is the love story working? Are the relationships between the characters working? Do they feel authentic, whatever? And then I'll do a pass like for a mystery and information pass, like are there enough clues? Am I giving too much information too early? Am I not giving enough information and nobody knows what's going on? Things like that. So I don't know, I just go over it and over and over it, but I only look at one thing at a time because that just works better for me. Yeah.
Can I ask a second? You've lived in like a lot of different places. Does the place that you live in influence like what you're specifically writing about?
I think it does, but it's never the book that I'm working on at the moment. It's always like the next one because it takes me, as we can tell, it takes me a while. So I think it always ends up creeping in, but usually so this one is set mostly in New York, and I lived in New York until 2017, and then it made it into this book. So yeah,
everybody's process is unique to them. And it's great to ask questions about it now, but you shouldn't take anything that any one author says is going to be gospel for you.
Yeah,
you have to figure it out on your own. Christina, wouldn't that be true?
I know nothing, Barbara.
Well, you've had me, so that helps a lot. But nonetheless, seriously.
You know everything, yes.
No, I don't. I can't write. That's why I talk. I'm serious. I am a great editor, and I am not a creative writer. I mean, it's a different mindset. It's a different skill set, to do that. I don't play well with imaginary friends, which is what you need to do. I mean, it really is what you need to do to be a writer. You have to be happy to spend time with them.
Yeah.
So, right. Anybody have a final?
I'm just curious, you say you always liked maps.
Uh-huh.
people who grew up with you, went to school with you, didn't know that you loved maps, maybe didn't even know that you wanted to be an author. So I'm just curious.
Come on, I talked about it all the time. What are you talking about?
People say. No, so I'm curious, are there these layers that maybe, certainly they didn't know about the maps. So are there these secret obsessions that you have that are going to show up in other books?
We should really stop broadcasting. Patrick, it's time. It's time
Perfect
to say-
cliffhanger.
Did you know about the maps?
You knew about the writing,
I knew
though.
about the
You knew
writing.
better. Okay, yeah. Come on, Sam.
She just didn't want to expose geekiness as an adolescent. You know, who wants
That's
to?
my question. Are those like these obsessive, geeky things that you
I
have
don't know.
that you want to tell to everybody, or
Sorry.
they're just
Well, you know,
blossoming in the background?
do you know about the yaks? You know, okay, you know about the sea.
I think we just talked about it.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it was just one of
That's
those
a
things that
great
didn't
line.
really.
You know, you should use that as the title.
Yeah, do you know
Did
about
you
the
know
yak?
about the yak?
See, some people do though.
I know, but that's a great book title.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I think it was just one of those things. Like, I don't know if we ever talked about it back then because it was like, how are maps really going to come up? We're all in high school. We're like studying madly, freaking out about our
We're in
grades.
geography.
But wait. I don't know. Yeah, it just maybe it was one of those things. That's the thing about obsessions, right? They're like yours only, and then if you share them, I think especially when you're that young, you kind of feel like you're losing control of it a little bit, and you don't want to do that. You want it all for yourself. So
Here's the secret. As you grow older, you care less and less about, I'm 81 now. When I was 61, I couldn't even be quite so, you just don't care as much. It all sort of wears down. Actually, you're just happy to be with people. You know, it just works out that way. I think it's very hard when you're young. You think that every eye is upon you, and every eye is upon you critically. It's so hard to be an adolescent. It really is for that reason, you know, because and also you want to be in a pack. At the one time in your life you most want to be part of a pack is when you're a teenager, and so it's hard to be different as a teenager because then you're outside the pack. Yeah. So a lot of things. But you made a great point. Besides, we got this title, which I'm going to write it down as soon as we leave here. Did you know about the yak? I love it. I'm going to send it to your editor.
She knows about the yaks.
Yeah, but she may not have thought of it as a book title.
This is true. She didn't. Well, she might have. So there was an interview today in the Chicago Tribune that came out, and somehow we also I don't know how this guy got it out of me, but I was telling him about yaks, and it made it into the article. So if you go read that one, I explain why I like yaks so much in that article today.
Or a short story for tour.com.
Yeah, or that. Yeah.
Next setting, Tibet.
Yeah.
It's going to be that true.
Yeah.
Well, this has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.